But now, let's talk about His Majesty the King, because he said that he's been moved to tears by the cards and well wishes he's received since his cancer diagnosis. This follows yesterday, where the King met Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for the first time face-to-face since his diagnosis. Joining me now is the former BBC royal correspondent Michael Cole. Michael, welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Glad to be able to talk to you about something slightly more uplifting than the BBC this time around. The King, obviously, very, very keen to continue to work as much as he can. Went to see Rishi Sunak, had a face-to-face meeting. He seems to be doing OK at the moment. Obviously, we can't say for sure, but what's your take on it all?
Good evening, Mike. Yeah, big boys don't cry. But, of course, if you're a king, you can make your own rules up. And I think it was very affecting to hear the King say that all the wonderful messages of goodwill he'd received from around the country and around the world had reduced him to tears. And I imagine, confronted with intimations of your own mortality, you're entitled to have a little bit of a weep before you get on with the job. And yesterday he was showing himself getting on with the job. It's not unprecedented for the monarch to be seen meeting and greeting the Prime Minister. You will remember that only, I think, 2 days before her death, Her Majesty the Queen met Liz Truss up at Balmoral, and Liz Truss came in dressed like a postulant nun and showed that she had not a faintest clue about how to do a curtsy. But the Queen obviously put her at ease, and that's how it is during these meetings, which are officially called an audience of the monarch. So there we see Sunak sitting down for his audience. Now, during this audience, of course, which is never filmed, it's only 2 people, notes are not taken, there are no minutes, it's completely private, and there are never any leaks. And during that time, of course, the monarch exercises the royal prerogative. And what's that? Well, it's in 3 parts, like the Holy Trinity. The monarch has the right to be consulted, i.e. to be told, and he has the right to warn, and he has the right to encourage. Now, what went on yesterday, we shall never know, but I'm quite sure that they seem to be getting on very well together, and the King looked, to my mind, quite well, considering his diagnosis, and is quite clear to show that the show goes on.
Yes, and there was a lot of talk at the time, wasn't there, that, you know, because he'd been so candid previously about his prostate problem, that maybe it would be more helpful if he was a bit more forthcoming about what this particular cancer is. But that's not really moved on since the original diagnosis. Do you still think perhaps that there will come a time when he tells us what it is that he's got, what cancer it is that he's got?
Mike, I do. I tell you why, because it was intimated last night. He said, or Sunak said to him, yeah, it's given such a boost to all these charities. And he said, yes, all these wonderful cancer charities, of which I've been patron for years. Now, when he sees those figures where 1,000% increase in the helplines for prostate cancer or inquiries about prostate problems, when he sees the charities saying this has done a tremendous amount of good, I think within reason, and obviously he's as entitled to privacy as the rest of us, he should come forward, and I think he will. In America, of course, the Americans have a right, it's not in the Constitution, but they seem to have a right to know everything about the health of the president, you know, his blood pressure, everything about him down to, you know, from his the tips of his toes to the top of his head. And that is published in the press, and people discuss it. We haven't quite got to that in this country, but I think if he's well advised and when he sees the reaction there has been, the King will take a decision on it, and I think he would be applauded. I mean, in this day and age, I mean, when I was growing up, I'm a bit older than you, quite a lot older than you, people didn't dare to say the cancer word. It was just never spoken. And in fact, it's changed now. The C word is mentioned. And incidentally, if I may do a little bit of boasting, the C word, I'm responsible for that being currency, because John Wayne, the famous Hollywood actor, flew into London in the early 70s to make one of his last films, and he'd been ill. And I interviewed him at Heathrow Airport on film, and he said, I've beaten the C word, I've beaten the C word, I've beaten the big C. That was it, the big C. And then after that, people became much more willing to discuss it. I don't think we need to have a daily bulletin, but I think it would be helpful to people. And I think it's 1 in 3 of us in this world will face cancer at some stage in our lives. And hopefully most of us will get over it sufficiently that we can have a good life.
Right. And I presume it's still not that clear either exactly what kind of treatment he's getting. And again, some people have speculated about what it might be, that he's been coming back to London every so often to be getting parts and bits of that treatment. Again, I mean, I'm not saying we should know, but again, would probably benefit from his talking about it as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. He's gone to Sandringham, probably the most, apart from Balmoral, which is pretty cold this time of year, the most isolated one of his estates. I think because he wants to keep separate from everybody. I noticed that, and I've been there many times, the media at St Mary Magdalene Church at Sandringham are being kept back at least another 50 yards from where they used to be. They want to keep him private because when you're having any sort of cancer treatment, the risk of infection, of course, is to be avoided at all costs. And I think he's coming down to London, combining it with visits like the one we saw yesterday, in order to have what amounts to inpatient, outpatient treatment. He's obviously seeing his specialists. They're doing whatever it is they're doing. I think at some stage, depending on how it progresses and how noticeable it is, it may be that they would wish to reassure the public about the progress and the good progress, which we hope there will be. That would seem to me to be sensible. Things are changing. And I tell you what, Mike, and we're both experienced, we've been around the block a few times. I think the way Buckingham Palace is shaping up from a press point of view, and particularly Kensington Palace, they're actually, the new people that got in there are doing it a lot better than the old guard.
Yes, I think that's probably true. And I wonder whether in their conversation, Rishi Sunak and the King had a conversation or a discussion about what Prince William came up with this week, because he kind of set the heather alight, didn't he? And said that he issued his statement about Gaza, calling for an end to the fighting. A lot of people thought it was political. A lot of people thought it was the right thing to do. What did you make of that?
Well, you've stated the constitutional position absolutely perfectly, but to every rule, there is an exception. And I said on your channel before it was even confirmed, I said that Prince William would not have said any of this without passing it first before number 10 Downing Street and the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron. And that was later confirmed in the day. And Sunak said this is in line with government thinking. And Prince William did not actually use the word ceasefire. But Mike, he's got credentials. You know, he's got credentials. He was the first royal person to make an official visit to Israel, and he went to the West Bank, and he also said to the Palestinians, "You are not forgotten." And let me just say that after the terrible atrocities, Hamas atrocities on the 7th of October, he and his wife issued a statement saying that they were suffering profound distress because of that attack. And Michael, he's got special status in Israel. And I'll tell you why, because his great-grandmother, Princess Alice of Greece and Denmark, she is designated in Israel as real aristocracy. She is one of the righteous among the nations. She is one of the people who risked their lives to help Jews. And she did that when she saved Jewish lives in Athens during World War II. And she's buried on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, which means, of course, City of Peace, as if. And wouldn't it be wonderful if it were?
Well, it would, but I mean, as we've seen, unfortunately, here on the streets and inside the Houses of Parliament, it's not that easy to solve. And the Israeli government weren't all that keen, I think, on what he said, and said, well, it would be lovely, but, you know, there are a few problems in the way, notably Hamas, and that is, of course, the other problem. And when we discussed it here on my show, I said, you know, he does leave himself open slightly, does he not, to now having to sort of pronounce on some other things that happen. You know, there's a lot of conflict in the world. There's a lot of people dying.
Yeah, but the chief rabbi of this country, Mervis, who is an extraordinary man, he welcomed what Prince William said. The thing is, Mike, you know, we've got a huge role in this. It was the Balfour Declaration that paved the way to the Jewish homeland. And from 1919 Treaty of Versailles until 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel, we exercised the mandate. We ran the place. We ran Palestine, as it was then called. So we are very much involved in this. And do you know what? I actually think that Netanyahu would have listened more closely to what Prince William said than he would have done to even President Biden or Rishi Sunak, if he even thinks about him at all. I think that when Prince William took that unprecedented step, the thing is that if he'd said nothing, Michael, I think ordinary people would have said, well, doesn't he care? And what is interesting, a poll which has been taken, I think it's YouGov, says that 2/3 of people in this country approve and support what he said. So I think he's on message, and I think he's got it right.
OK, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Michael Cole there, former royal correspondent, of course, at the BBC. I've got some messages that have come in from you to us about, of course, what's going on with the King. And here it is. Jake says, God bless the King. I'm so glad to see him back in action. Anna says, the King is such a kind and gentle-hearted person, together with Queen Camilla, that they have both grown to be very special to me. Long live the King, and all blessings to the Prince and Princess of Wales and their gorgeous children. One more, Jane says, as someone who has watched family members suffer and die with this dreadful disease, I would never wish this upon my worst enemies. The toll it takes is heart-wrenching. I wish King Charles well and pray that he and they have caught it early to give the right treatment.